Hi, welcome to session 3 of Sowing Seeds of Climate Hope. Today we might get a little uncomfortable because we're going to talk about lifestyles. Because our personal lifestyles affect dramatically the amount of pollution that's going on, and so there's a necessity to change it. And I realize we're fiercely independent. But if we believe in the Gospels and we believe in an ethical life, then we need to look at our personal lifestyles. And so today we're going to hit 3 subjects on if we change our personal lifestyle, it'll dramatically affect the future for our kids. And those are, we are what we eat. And then also to reduce the food waste that we sow. 40% of our food supply is wasted. And last but not least, are improving our control of wasting energy in our houses using smart thermostats. There's a lot of other technologies out there, but we'll hit these 3, and that'll give us plenty for you to talk about in the discussion that happens after this. So follow the guide. Take time to listen to each other, share the benefits that you see and what's possible, but most of all, go from there to share with your friends, your neighbors, and your community. In this episode, we're going to get maybe a little uncomfortable because we're going to get up close and personal as we talk about what's the effect of our diet in terms of heating up the earth, in terms of global destruction. And it turns out it's pretty significant. Michael Pollan once famously said that our problem with eating lies in that we shouldn't eat too much and it should be mostly plants. And it's that mostly plants that really is the crux of the issue. Our Western diet that really strongly favors beef, right, has amazing destructive things. If cows were a nation, they'd be the 3rd most destructive nation on earth in terms of global emissions. It's not just simply the fact that they belch all the time when they're digesting, and that belching is methane gas, which is 85 times more powerful of a gas than carbon dioxide. But it's also in the amount of land that we clear off for it. And it's also in the amount of water that is necessary to sustain the animals. It takes 10,000 pounds of water to yield 1 pound of beef. 1 pound of beef. Obviously, that's not sustainable. As we're looking at a world that's already got 7.4 billion people on its way over to 10 billion or more in the next 30 years, we're on an unsustainable path. And the problem is we're influencing the rest of the world. With our Mickey D's that we're exporting all over, more and more people are moving away from a fish-based and a plant-based diet into a meat-based because, well, we like the taste and we like the rich Western style. So what can we do about this? Well, there's a number of efforts that are trying to encourage us to move off. It's good for our health if for no other reason, but it's very important from an environmental standpoint. And so, all right, I'm a vegetarian wannabe. I confess right up front, I'm a carnivore, right? I really like meat. All right, but there are ways that you can gradually ease into this. There's Meatless Mondays, which has been a global campaign for decades, and it's having some positive effect. And for those of us like me that forget occasionally on Monday, there's always Try Again Tuesday, all right? Or there's Fish Friday. Or there's a new one I've heard about, which is Vegan Before 6. So every meal you eat before dinner is plant-based. All of that can mean a significant reduction. One of the things that my wife and I have done over the last few years is we've completely moved away from red meat. So we no longer eat beef and pork. And here's the thing. We do just fine. We satisfy our meat craving through chicken and turkey and fish. And you can have outstanding recipes where I don't miss it. All right, I do get a little salivating when I see a rack of ribs. But, it's been 4 years and I've been good. Someday when I grow up, I hope to be a vegetarian, but it's a long way away from that for me. And maybe for you. But that doesn't mean we can't do significant efforts right now. Why is it important? Well, scientists tell us that the yield for going is, if we can move more of the human population, say half of it, away from meat, or at least making meat a small accent to it rather than the principal one, we can save 66 gigatons, 66 gigatons of carbon pollution at no cost. There is absolutely no cost to change this diet. In fact, there's a lot of savings. There's savings in terms of health, and there's savings in terms of the environment. And here's the thing, you don't got to wait for anybody else. You can do this starting today. More and more people are into it. I have friends that are vegetarians, and I have some friends that are vegans. Now, vegans is almost like a religion, but it's possible to do. You just need to be disciplined, and maybe someday we'll gather, we'll grow into that way. But in the meantime, starting today, we could change. Where does the Bible come into this? The Bible has lots and lots and lots of passages on food and on eating, and on what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat. And some of those are very prehistoric. They come and made sense when we didn't have refrigerators. But there are some rules that the call to be disciplined about what we eat and how much we eat is important. But there's one that speaks to me more than anything. And it doesn't come right to mind when you think about this issue. If you remember the passage from Matthew, when Jesus is about to feed the multitude. It's Matthew chapter 14, verse 14 is where we start. He says, when he came ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, and he cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, this is a deserted place, and the hour is late. Send the crowds away so they may go into villages and buy food for themselves. Jesus said to them, they need not go away. You feed them. Jesus says to us, we feed them. That can be a little hard to grasp. It can be a little difficult to understand. But if we live a life centered in compassion, the life that Jesus told us to live, then we have to be concerned about the future for our kids. We have to be concerned about all the poor people in this world. And one of the easiest ways we can approach that is to change our diet. Can you do that? Sure you can. Start with the next meal. Right? Start with a meatless Monday. And remember, if you blow it on Monday, there's always try again Tuesday. But try it. Your doctor will thank you. But more importantly, your kids will thank you. We're not done talking about food, because feeding 7.5 billion people is a huge load on the planet. And so we need to talk about a really big issue. It doesn't sound like a big issue when you first think about it, but you dig into it, it's a big issue. What is it? It's food waste. It's the amount of food that is thrown out rather than consumed. Our technical resource, Project Drawdown, rates this as the number 3 possible solution to our pollution. Number 3. That's because 70 gigatons of pollution could be saved if we reduce the amount of food we waste. Why? Well, because fully 1/3 of the food that is grown is never consumed. It's wasted. Now, in the developing countries, a lot of that is due to they don't have the systems. They don't have the distribution systems. They don't have the storage systems. They don't have the coordination systems. They don't have the refrigeration systems. And so food rots. It rots on the field when the orders don't get placed in time. It rots in the trucks because they're not protected from the environment. It rots in the storage. 1/3 of our food is wasted at a time when over 1 billion of our people are hungry. That's a sin. But it's not just the third world. It's not just the developing world that has this 1/3 problem. We have the same problem. How do we have that problem? Well, it comes from a couple of things. Number one, we demand to have perfect food. We really do. And so we bypass food that doesn't look perfect. It looks a little less than perfect. And that was a result, that stuff is thrown out by the grocer, or it won't be selected by the distributor. What's the other thing? Well, in that big refrigerators that we all have, we get lost. We lose food that we bought until we smell it. We don't plan our menus well. We think we're going to use stuff that we don't wind up doing, and we wind up throwing it away. It's a shame. Also, there's a lack of coordination sometimes between the people who really need the food and the distributors that are holding on to the food. And so, if the grocers would all line up to work with the people who distribute the food to food pantries and soup kitchens on a very streamlined basis, then we could reduce significantly the amount of food that's wasted. Right? A couple of countries have advanced this to the point where it's the law. A grocer is not allowed to throw out the old food. He must find a way to get it to people who need it. So that's true in France, that's true in Netherlands. It's a significant issue. 1/3 of our food is wasted. So the soil is wasted, the water is wasted, the pollution is wasted. We can do better. In the book of Leviticus, in the Old Testament, all the way back in the 25th chapter, it spends a lot of time explaining the Sabbath laws. Now, modern American Protestants, especially us, we look upon the Sabbath law as applying to when do we go to church. It's much more than that. It described a way of life, a way of living in balance with God's good creation. It described how you harvest your fields and what portion of it you set off for the poor to eat. That's called gleaning. When you should rest your foods and how you should rotate your crops. How we should all spend time in the presence of God at rest. We can be wiser on what we do. We can save 70 gigatons of pollution by reducing the amount of food waste. And it doesn't cost money. It saves money. Can we do this? Can we be a little bit smarter? We don't even need to wait for the smart refrigerators that are going to tell you, hey, your eggs are getting old. If we think about it, if we take active planning into what we're going to use, what we're going to consume, if we encourage our grocers to use their food that no one is buying to send to food pantries and to soup kitchens, if we encourage our regulations to come to a standard, what's it mean to use by date? Because there's no standard right now. So that we know whether the food is going to be still good or whether we need to trash it. If we're loving our neighbors so that we help the developing world with distribution systems, with refrigeration systems, with yield systems, with packaging systems, we could significantly reduce what is simply a waste right now. We could eliminate sin from our food systems. We can do this. We can save the earth for the future of our kids simply by being smarter on how we do our daily lives today. And we're going to focus today on something interesting on that wall. I'm not talking about the Salvador Dali print of a Hawaiian king, although it's pretty interesting. That's why we have it on the wall. Really, I want to talk about that little box on the wall. What is it? Well, it's a thermostat, of course. Why talk about thermostats? Well, first of all, global energy, 40% of it goes into controlling our buildings, how warm they are or how cool they are. 40%. So bringing some intelligent control over that is significant. Why homes? Well, homes, a household thermostat is responsible for controlling 9% of the energy that's used globally. 9%. So it would make sense to think about how we control that 9% and whether we can improve upon it. You know, the thermostats when I was young were the old mercury dials, you know, and so my mother would crank it up and my father would come along behind and crank it down, and back then it was just controlling our heat, whereas now it controls 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, heat and cool. And so it's a huge investment. So why would we continue to use the technology of old? Our phones have changed. We don't longer have the crank phones or the party lines. Why would we stay with thermostats that require us to be constantly focused on them in order to maximize energy savings? As it turns out, studies show that we're woefully bad at saving energy by how we control the thermostat. Even when we do programmable thermostats, the next step up, because we forget to adjust them when our schedule changes or when we're out of the house. Here comes computer-controlled thermostats, what we call smart thermostats. If you have Wi-Fi in your house, they're easy to install. They're a little computer themselves, or to connect to the internet so you can access them using your phone. If you want to take another step forward, you can connect them to your utility so they have energy efficient programs that they can load in it. But even not going that far, a smart thermostat recognizes when you're in the house and when you're not in the house. It recognizes change in your behavior and your schedule, and it will adjust this thermostat to maximize energy savings. Why does this matter? 9%. 10% of global energy demand. Why wouldn't we want to bring smart technology into it? Because when we just rely on human behavior, well, studies show that we're not too good at that. You know, in the gospel, several different times in the different gospels, Jesus talks about on what foundation do we build? Do we build on sifting sand, or do we build our foundation on stone, on rock, on firm foundation? Do we listen to words of wisdom, or do we discard them? We need to re-examine how we build. Do we build simply for luxury, or do we build for a sustainable future for our kids, for your kids and my kids, your grandkids and my grandkids? Smart thermostats. If you look at Project Drawdown's numbers, the amount of carbon it reduces from the atmosphere is tremendous. That's not a mistake. That's not a negative spending. That's a cost savings right from the get-go when you install one of these. Even with today's prices, without the rebates, they pay for themselves in less than 2 years. And as with all computer systems, the price will go down when the capability starts up. Smart thermostats can alert you on the phone if you got a problem. So if you're traveling, you can know if there's a problem at home. And I've known people who paid for that dearly not knowing that their furnace has stopped working. So why wouldn't you do this? You can even get smart thermostats that you can yell at from across the room. Hey, turn it up or turn it down. And of course, they're smart enough to readjust that when you're no longer paying attention. Smart thermostats. What we can do when faith guides our use of technology rather than our greed or our indifference. We can do this in little everyday steps that you and I can take. It doesn't take huge corporations, it doesn't take nations, it simply takes you and I caring about the future of our kids. This is one of the 48 action steps that you'll find on our website for steps that you can take right here and right now, not waiting on anybody else. It's what God is calling us to do. Smart thermostats, smart people. You betcha.